agonies in which he was plunged during all his sufferings, but especially on the cross, hath delivered me from the anguish and torments of hell. And you will have noticed the words used in that question and answer of Christ's sufferings. Anguish, occurring twice. Pains, plural. Terrors, agonies, and torments. Answer 44 says that Christ was plunged into these sufferings, plunged so as to be overwhelmed by them. These sufferings into which Christ was plunged are said to be both inexpressible and hellish. Inexpressible simply means you can't express it. There are no words in the English language or any others which can capture what Christ underwent. And so the minister is stumped. He doesn't have a vocabulary. And even if he did, he couldn't get the point across the way it needs to be put across. Maybe if the minister were to scream a little, maybe that people might get a little bit of the terrible reality conveyed to them. And these sufferings are also inexpressible because no man on earth has ever felt or experienced anything like Christ's torments. So you can't express it because you don't really know what it's like. And even if you did, words aren't free to fit it. Inexpressible torments, anguish, pains, agonies, and terrors. When these sufferings are said to be hellish, it means that Christ endured the same type of pain as the damned experience in the pit of hell. Only, of course, it's worse. It's far worse. Far, far, far worse. Those who are in hell suffer only for their own sins. Christ suffered the punishment due to millions of God's elect. Christ's sufferings were so terrible that unless he had been God, he would have been swallowed up in an instant. But his divine nature sustained him and undergirded the human nature so that he was able, just about, so to speak, to bear it. Well, the damned in hell don't need or receive this help. A human being can bear the punishment of his own sins in hell, and he screams. He screams forever. That word hellish too, spoken of Christ's sufferings, reminds us that Christ's sufferings are for sin. That's what hell's about, punishment for sin. Christ's hellish sufferings means that he was guilty for our transgressions. As Isaiah 53 keeps saying time and time again, he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was on him. And as the one who endures hellish sufferings, Christ experiences God's disfavour and loathing as he is on the cross. As those sins are imputed to him, and God views Christ as he views us in our sins, and loathes and abominates and detests him and makes the world dark because God himself can hardly look on his own Son. These hellish sufferings were Christ's throughout his whole life. He was plunged into them during all his sufferings. And he suffered from the cradle to the grave, but especially on the cross. Now Isaiah 53 verse 10 also speaks of Christ's descent into hell. But you can pore long and hard over this verse before you see the word hell. or before you see the word descent. But the reality, the substance of it, is in this verse, as you will see. The text begins, "It pleased the Lord to bruise him." That word bruise could be taken in a lighter sort of form, as you think of when you go black, blue, and maybe yellow and green, or purple, when you get a punch, let's say, on your arm. But that's not the idea of bruise here. It's a bruise such that you're broken in pieces. So you're beaten small, and you are crushed. We might say it pleased the Lord to pound upon him and beat him to bits and pulverize him, so that the fierce blows of divine wrath descended upon him and rained down from heaven upon him, crushing him, breaking him, pulverizing him. And this is like what is happening right now in hell to the wicked. Only it was far worse for Christ, because he was crushed and pulverized for all the sins of all of God's people. It pleased the Lord to bruise him, crush him. He hath put him to grief. And grief here carries the idea of sickness and disease. Sickness and disease in both body and soul. And from that sickness and disease comes the secondary idea of affliction and grief. These two words in our Bibles, bruised or crush, and grief, need to be put together. And this is the idea, the sense of it in the Hebrew. So that Christ was crushed, broken in pieces, and pulverized in body and in soul, and so it was that he suffered terrible affliction and grief. This is why I'm calling this, he descended into hell. Our catechism would, if it were to take up the ideas and words of Isaiah 53, verse 10, refer to his hellish affliction, grief, and crushing. So what happened to Jesus on the cross then? He descended into hell. Physically, he's on the tree. No bodily movement of Christ, or no movement even of his soul to the realms beneath. But hell has come to him. Because hell in its essence is the fiery wrath of God against sin. But here we have hell so concentrated, like it's never been concentrated before or never will since, so consecrated upon the one who's forsaken of God. And that's what Christ says. Jesus of Nazareth. So it was that no one could stand with him. No one could share in it. It was entirely appropriate, therefore, though sinful on the behalf of the disciples, that they fled and hid, because they can share a meal with him, but they can't share in the sufferings of the cross. Because Jesus alone could and would endure it, because he loved us. He loved us, as John 13 puts it, unto the end, all the way to the bitter end. Now, who brought Jesus into such terrible straits? Well, that's easy. What do the Passion accounts in the 4 Gospels tell us? The religious leaders. They plotted it. They were behind it.